Except for, did you see, like, he couldn't read the teleprompter, so he said rent was going to be capped at $55.
No.
So maybe we got a little bit of Mal Biden up in here. Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we'll be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Mariah and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Muhammad's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe link in the description, and they are very close to their goal, so please donate below. Don't forget there's a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information and updates about us and the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLibPodcast. I'm your co-host Kristen, and you can find me at KRXXTXN on all social media platforms.
And I'm Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms. So, this is going to be a little bit different because it is technically a book talk book. It is something I've seen on Book Talk. I'm sure Kristen has seen it on Book Talk, but it is also a classic. Kristen's shaking her head.
No, I did not see this on Book Talk.
Liar. Which
What
is
do you
pretty
mean?
crazy, though. I have seen it recommended so many times.
We are on.
Originally,
Go ahead.
okay.
I
was gonna say originally I had seen it recommended from horror like Book Talk, like it was like one of the original like most like scariest horror books when I had originally read it, and then I read it and I was like, okay, this is not
The thoughts
this is not
inside my
that.
head are scary. Horror to some people. I haven't seen it recommended, but I'm not on that side of Book Talk. Like, I don't get horror. The only like horror book I got recommended was Tender as the Flesh, and I feel like that was just because that got so popular on Book Talk just in general. But like Womb, like I only heard about from you, and like those other ones that you be talking about all the time.
Yeah, you don't get a lot of these. I saw it recommended again recently, and that is why it kind of got moved up. We had some other scheduling conflicts, but I had a feeling that we'd have a good discussion for a classic, which we haven't done a classic yet.
So I met my goal.
That's what we're going to be discussing.
Reading a classic this year. 30
You
pages.
did.
Woo!
You read an American classic, 30 pages. It's very short, and surprisingly, I do think there is going to be a lot of substance to discuss. So,
I feel like we should probably do a trigger warning at the top of the episode too, because it does focus a lot on like mental health and stuff like that. So like thoughts of suicide and anxiety and stuff like that. So maybe if that's something that you don't want to hear us talking about and how it relates to Marxism and things like that, then this might not be a book or an episode for you as well.
yeah, I'm trying to think of other trigger warnings. It's going to be like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, postpartum psychosis, and then we're going to be discussing also like racism and like the history of like the suffrage movement and whatnot. So those are going to be relevant themes in this episode. So if those things are triggering to you, perhaps don't listen. But other than that, I think those are the only main triggers that I can think of. Mainly like mental health is going to be the biggest one.
Which, I mean, if you've heard anything about us, me and Mariah are no strangers to discussing mental health online.
Mental illness, we both have diagnoses, I believe. Or at least we have taken medication.
I went to a doctor and they gave me medication, so like whatever that means, you know.
Right, so there's some gravity to it, some merit in our own like lived experiences. We are not psychologists.
No.
We don't have a degree in this specialized area, so this is just going to be like
our own personal
subjective
experience relating to this book and I guess mental health in the early 1900s, late 1800s sort of area.
I also think that this book, because it is so short, there isn't going to be a non spoiler free of this episode because you have to discuss it. So ultimately when we are doing our reviews, just go read it. It's only 30 pages.
Yeah, I think
take a pause, go read it, and then come back.
That you can I think me and Mariah, it's free on Libby. They have unlimited digital copies to read on Libby. It's public domain, so you can find it anywhere online easily. So it's not there. It's completely accessible for everyone to read. It's really short. My Libby timed me, and it said it only took me 20 minutes to read. So,
I think I also found it on Internet Archive, which I think is another like they have like what am I thinking? Like scientific journals
mhm.
and whatnot, so kind of like a JSTOR, but also they have books that you can like rent out through them. So it's a different option. You can find it literally anywhere. If you type in like the yellow wallpaper PDF, it's gonna pop up.
Yeah, it's really accessible. So I would say, definitely read it. It's literally takes up no time, especially if you. It's an easy book to count towards your reading goal for the year for sure. But
Yeah, you're welcome. You're
um,
welcome. That was a quickie.
I've already been a book ahead on my reading goal. Just saying. So,
I'm proud of you. All
um,
right. So, do we want to get into who the author is
yes,
or the popularity surrounding it? I think it'd make more sense to I mean, there's not a whole lot to the popularity. Like this book in Charlotte's lifetime never won any awards, which is not a surprise. That usually doesn't happen for women
women
writers
writers.
in like the
Yeah.
18 or 1900s. But it is, I believe I found this from Sun Up Press. They said, and I quote, the story is regarded as an important early work of American feminist literature for its depiction of the attitudes towards the mental and physical health of women in the 19th century. It is also lauded as an excellent work of gothic and horror fiction. So it was originally published in the New England magazine in 1892, and then it got turned into a book in 1899. And since then, there has been several iterations and kind of collections of her work that have been printed. So the Yellow Wallpaper has gotten printed, I think I saw like 300 times in different formats. It is
Mm.
pretty crazy. It's quite an influential piece of literature when we just examine it as that.
Through the historical context of this novel and what the author did, because I feel like this is a great segue to actually talk about the author and stuff like that, because Mariah again did more research on the author, who is Charlotte something something Perkins Gilman.
Perkins Gilman.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, born in 1860. So if let's so the book itself, right, is kind of like a loose retelling of Charlotte Perkins Gilman's life experience and how she went through this treatment for her postpartum depression and anxiety called an unrest, I believe.
Like where it was autobiographical or whatever.
Yeah, like what? Okay, so it's called rest cure treatment.
Oh,
This is
like,
coming from the Wikipedia. Yeah, no, it was like an actual treatment that women in the 20th century, and women specifically
well,
were
this would
treated
have been the
for,
19th
with symptoms.
century.
Yeah, 19th and early 20th century,
Okay.
primarily for women suffering with symptoms of fatigue, anxiety, and depression. So the patients were often confined to bed for weeks or even months at a time with minimal physical activity and intellectual stimulation. And you can kind of see this in her book and like what she's talking about and like her kind of decay into madness, why this treatment was deemed harmful and not helpful at all to people dealing with mental health.
It's kind of funny
It's
to
just like
me because, like, this treatment is, like, one, like, not a treatment, because this is what I do whenever I'm, like, in my very depressed states where, like, every day, like, I mean, I'm gonna be so for real, like, if I'm not working that day, I'm laying in bed until 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. I'll sleep all day, I'll wake up at probably between 12 and 3, and then I lay there in bed all day. That is what my off time looks like. And to think that that would be a treatment, honestly, I'm not complaining. I would do it. But it doesn't
I
help.
think
I know that from experience, but I'm still gonna do it.
it is interesting to see like this and reading about it now and then recontextualizing it for other pieces of literary fiction that we've read, where there's also like My Year of Rest and Relaxation or Night
Mhm.
Bitch, where we see kind of like similar themes that were brought up in the Yellow Wallpaper. And I think you can definitely tell that like this piece of work specifically was influential to those,
Yeah.
and a lot of
Even,
like
like,
girly pops resonate with those.
the bell
Yeah,
jar
which I haven't
recipe
read
pop,
Bell
I
Jar.
have. But I think this is, like, I can see why this is, like, popular in that way, because I feel like a lot of especially white women with like My Year of Rest and Relaxation and we haven't done an episode on Night Bitch, but I actually really enjoyed that book, and I feel like this is, like, the best version of any of those books versus, like, The Bell Jar and My Year of Rest and Relaxation and, like, the Yellow Wallpaper and stuff like that, just because I feel like with this book specifically, it's very hard for me to feel sympathy. Obviously, like, I feel sympathy because I understand what it's like to be suffering, like, in a mental health crisis and not having anything to do or helping you or anything like that. But then also that there's so many women, especially now and in that time, that would suffer from the same ailments of like mental illness, postpartum depression, whatever it have you, and they don't get either this care that was kind of viewed as a very like important care for one that was mostly for white women, and two, like she was able to have people one come clean her house and things like that and then take care of her children while other women still experience like postpartum depression and things like that, and they still have to take care of their family and their kids and they don't get that opportunity to go rest lay around a house like that, you know.
Which I can definitely agree. And it kind of makes sense because when we look at the suffragette movement, and who it consisted of when we have Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Charlotte was also a big theorist in that movement. And I think it kind of makes sense when you look at like some of the stuff that she said. She was part of the socialist movement. She did a lot of poetry. So she would write like slogans and whatnot, but she said like in her The Socialist and the Suffragist, um she said, "My cause is greater than yours. You only work for a special class. We work for the gain of general mass, which is every good and sure." So there's a lot of her sentiments where she really embraced the whole like egalitarian society.
There was like
So I can see like this piece of work being a means to kind of convey like this solidarity amongst women of her social status so that they could all kind of like resonate and then build on that to get them on board with like the suffrage movement.
but again, like with Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they don't actually care about the rights of all women. It was just specifically white women and their rights and things like that.
Which a lot of people don't know, which I also didn't know when I originally had read this, is that
Yes.
Charlotte, is a raging racist
Yes.
and a eugenicist.
Which
She
is all
has the
those women
most
were.
outlandish it all it makes sense. As soon as I heard that, I was like, she was probably a racist.
Yeah.
And it was true. It was very true, which is so confusing because she had some lines where she had talked about because one of her like feminist theories was surrounding Darwinism, like social Darwinism. I can't remember exactly what the Darwinism that she supported was called. But she wrote that there is no female mind, the brain is not an organ of sex, might as well speak of a female liver. Like she definitely criticized like the idea of like
Gender
understanding like
being.
bioessentialism,
Yeah.
which pushed back. However, that didn't extend to racism and like race as a concept because she
Yes.
still felt like that was like a biological thing, which I don't know
Which
how
doesn't
she
make
couldn't
any
make the leap to
sense.
that.
Because I feel like
It's nonsensical.
I think at least like I don't know if it's maybe because of, like the United States culture now and stuff like that, where I feel like it's almost as if the people that are not racist and stuff like it's really hard to word this like properly. Let me gather my thoughts. Hold on. Like nowadays people are a lot more accepting and people understand that race is not necessarily like a difference within like biology and things like that it is cultural differences now and stuff like that, where it's interesting that she didn't have that idea but then she realized that gender is like cultural differences as well, which is like kind of like the opposite problem what we have here now, I feel like.
Like she was so close to the point,
Mhm.
but at the same time so far away. And it seemed as though like she was so threatened by her place in society because a lot of like what her sentiments were when it was like she was anti-immigration and whatnot. So you can tell she had like that element of like white fragility about her that a lot of like the suffragettes also had, where they didn't want to be on the same playing field as other like women of color.
Yeah, well, because, like, it's always interesting too because, like, a lot of the information that Mariah and I are discussing and stuff like that, we read in Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis. So I think that would be great. Like, if you haven't read that, like after reading this or before reading this, reading like Women, Race, and Class that talks a lot about like the women's suffragette movement and stuff like that, where you can see like the racism within the white women and the white women community that were like pushing that, where they would always like identify more with Frederick Douglass, a black man, and his writing and stuff like that, and they were on like the same playing field as them, but then they didn't feel as if they were on the same playing field as black women, which is entirely insane to me to like have, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't get how they could be so disconnected.
Like white supremacist ideology and how it can like influence what areas of liberation they choose to support
Mhm.
and uplift, but they're doing it from a completely like selfish lens,
Mhm.
and they also aren't principled necessarily in like a liberation ideology, because I don't want to reduce it to be like, oh well, they're not Marxist, because there were Marxists that also were like eugenicist, and like the socialist movements, like that was present at the time when we like analyze it. It was present in Angela Davis's findings
Yeah.
um of the movement. Hello, Kai. When we are analyzing the yellow wallpaper, I think it's important to take this into consideration. And there was another woman who wrote an essay, and I didn't get the opportunity to read her essay in full. But her name, Lancer, can't remember what her first name is, Susan S. Lancer, wrote a provocative essay called Feminist Criticism, the Yellow Wallpaper, and the Politics of Color in America. So the reference to that, where she discusses, so the color yellow a century ago connotated such negative at or connotated such negative traits as quote unquote inferiority, strangeness, cowardice, ugliness, and backwardness. Thus, Lancers concludes the yellow wallpaper is best read within the discourse of racial anxiety, which kind of makes sense because she was really afraid of people who were immigrating here,
Mhm.
especially people who were
Different.
different people who were from like different Asian countries and cultures, because they were deemed like, that makes sense. Like after World War I, they were coming over here and she was very
When did
much
she
against.
die? You know? You said she was born in
She killed
1860.
herself.
That's so funny. I mean, it's not funny, but it is. Sorry.
Hold on.
I didn't know that. That's
Hold
actually,
on.
I think that's funny.
I forgot to put that in here, that I was going to tell you that she did in fact
That's so funny. Like, it's
suicide.
not funny, but I'm laughing.
So yeah, let me find it. Where is it? She had a quote that went along with it.
Is her killing herself?
Okay, yeah, so suffering from breast cancer, Charlotte Perkins Gilman committed suicide on the 17th of August, 1935. She left a note that said, when all usefulness is over, when one is assured of unavoidable and imminent death, it is the simplest of human rights to choose a quick and easy death in place of a slow, horrible one. I have preferred chloroform to cancer.
She
That was
was
in her
she
note.
was 75
Which,
though.
like,
So she was already old
yeah.
as dirt. Sorry. Honestly,
So she did low key support like
assisted
euthanization
suicide.
suicide. So very early proponent of that,
The woke
which I
left.
respect. Holy shit.
um which I mean, like, I can only imagine being alive during that time where like we still barely know anything about cancer now, you know? Like, so many people still
Yeah,
die
and
from
I like we both support like euthanization, like
it.
ethical euthanization. Like you should
Yeah.
have the option to be able to do that. And I also work with people who do have like terminal illnesses and whatnot, and seeing them kind of like
Suffer.
decay and suffer for a prolonged period of time, it really changes your viewpoint if you weren't supporting it before. Most of me and my coworkers do support it, TBH, to
Um
be honest.
Well, I have to support it because I already know how I'm going out of here. It's been widely discussed on this podcast. I am not becoming an old person. That sounds absolutely horrendous. So I think I'm planning at around 50, 55, maybe, depending. There will
Not
not.
even gonna retire first?
No, because I'm not even gonna get to retire. So
Okay, that fair enough. Retirement is not gonna happen in our lifetime. I understand that.
they're gonna keep raising the age until it's 100, and the I mean, what is it already? It's already almost to 70 and
It starts at 65 and then you get more of a social security payout if
wait
you wait till
longer.
67.
Yes. And the average life expectancy for an American is like only 76.1 years or something. So that's not even 10 years you get being off of work.
Oh,
And especially someone who's been working since they were 16, you know? So technically before, if you count like babysitting and things like that. But in society, it's not considered working. But anyways, which I'm sure Miss Gilman would have lots of things to say about that.
you know what she did? She talked about it in one of her essays. I'm trying to remember what it was called. It was called like Women in Work, like where she just talked about like
Women,
women's work and like
it's
the underpaid value of like the labor that women produce, like
yeah,
domestic labor and whatnot. So she had a pretty good grasp to
it's
a certain extent, like a very surface level,
it's crazy that you
like
can like
feminist understanding.
understand that like, oh, like women who take care of children and take care of the home and stuff like that are doing labor and work in that way, but then you're also going to be racist and not even understand that women of color and black women specifically in the United States are the ones that are doing like this type of domestic labor for rich white people, and not even like comment on that or like say anything about that in general, you know?
Because with like the separationist movements, which I think it was in Feminism for the 99%, where she talked about like their inability to achieve anything material
Mhm.
on like radical changes in society because they don't take into consideration like the other aspects of oppression in a class-based society.
Yes.
So it's essential to our collective liberation from white supremacy, from patriarchy, from capitalism, that we all have to be a unified force and you can't
Mhm.
just focus on like your specific type of oppression. It has to take in all
And
aspects.
I think that's one thing where at least like liberals on TikTok and liberals within the United States that are like Biden bros and stuff like that, like all of that sort of thing, it's that I feel like they kind of fall under that where they're like the idea of that you can see this whenever they criticize Trump to such an extreme, but then won't do the same for like Biden or like other like left. I'm using very big air quotes whenever talking like Bernie Sanders or AOC and stuff like that.
Like in the terms of like American politics, like Biden is considered left, but he's only like left of Donald Trump by like just a little smidge.
Yeah. And it's only like basically for economic policy where it's not even anything actually relevant to working class Americans to benefit from. Except for, did you see like he couldn't read the teleprompter, so he said rent was going to be capped at $55.
No.
So maybe we got a little bit of Mal Biden up in here.
Based if true, like he was just like that far gone that he was just citing like whatever came
I
across
think
his desk.
well, it's because
Like,
their
true.
new campaign thing, they said if he gets reelected for a second term, they're capping rent increases at 5% is what he meant to say. Which he's not getting reelected if he says he's going to eliminate all medical debt and rent cappings at 5%. This is like these are good things that like Americans have been asking for, but one, what have you been doing the last 4 years? And two, there are other more prioritizing things that the left voters actually want you to do to earn their votes, like I don't know, stopping the genocide in Gaza. Um
But you can tell like when he looks at the camera, like the hamster wheel, right, in his head, the hamster that's supposed to be running it, it's dead.
It's
It's
really
long dead. It's a
I
corpse. Nothing's going
it's
on.
definitely, like, I feel like at this point, it's, like, elder abuse because, like, you work with people this old,
I do. I work with people younger than Joe Biden.
and that's the thing, it's, like,
Well, certainly he's got that lead paint stare.
once you get to that age, though, it's like your health just starts rapidly declining, and it's so unhealthy. Like, I can't even imagine, like if that was like my family member, like my grandpa or something, I would be like, "Stop this, please!" Like, this is why they can raise the retirement age because they're like, "Oh, we just get to work forever if you're rich
It's
and."
kind of like they're part of this generation of people where like their sole value in society was so closely linked to the capitalist mode of production that they don't feel that when they are retired that they are valuable as human beings anymore. And this is just my subjective observation of people of what are they, Gen Alpha? Or
Who?
is that the wrong one? I can't remember.
Gen Alpha is
Like
like
their
your kids.
generation. Okay, not Gen
It's the
Alpha. What is it?
silent
There's
generation. I don't know what like
the
the
silent generation.
I don't know what the,
I
like,
yeah, I thought I had
number
a letter,
is or
but
I don't know, I just know they
it's
call them the
interesting.
silent generation. I don't know, like,
Apologies
what.
for the Joe Biden, tangent. We
Yeah.
probably should circle back,
Um,
reel it in.
she probably support Joe Biden, sorry.
No, Joe Biden's too progressive for her.
He allows immigration, not even though. He was on track to, like, deport as much people as Trump did in his 4 years, so. I guess we haven't really talked about our opinions on the book yet.
Yeah, like, the overall ratings, which I think you were very surprised when you saw that on Goodreads, the ratings has over 210,000 reviews and averages about 4.1 stars, which is quite high, in terms of Goodreads ratings.
Yes, especially for that many people, because I feel like the least amount of reviews, like, usually it's high. I know, like, statistically or whatever, that's not technically how it works, but at least for, like, if you wanna classify this as a book talk book, which I don't know, I'm sure there's a whole debate on what is a book talk book and what isn't a book talk book. It's like, if it's mentioned regularly on book talk, is it a book talk book even though it was relevant before book talk was, you know?
That is a debate. That's a debate for another day. I can't unpack that
That's
mentally.
something that I see a lot of the times on book talk, especially people that are not within the book talk community where somebody will be like, "Oh, like Cassandra Clare's The Clockwork Angel and whatever the other one is. I don't know, like her series. Like
Yeah, the clockwork.
people consider those like book talk books now because a lot of people on book talk about them, but then they were published and relevant like whenever Tumblr was popular for books and stuff like that. But it's like, is the Hunger Games considered a book talk book? Is the newest Hunger Games considered a book talk book, but not the older ones because of when they were published? That's a different tangent, but yeah. Anyways, but a lot of people did like the yellow wallpaper, and I was surprised whenever I first heard about it. I first heard about it from Mariah, and I thought whenever she was describing it to me, I thought you liked it.
No. I don't know how you got that
I
interpretation.
don't know. You're like, oh, it follows a lady that's like suicidal and in the yellow room, and her husband hates
It
her.
sounded like
I was
something
like,
that
this sounds
you
like
would have been
you.
all about, and I was like, "This is li
I thought it sounded like you like
like,
it.
this is the type of shit that in behind the scenes that we are texting each other is like, wow, mentally ill woman, mommy issues." I'm like, "This is right up Kristen's alley," or like the inverse will be like,
I think and that's the thing though, because, I didn't love the bell jar. I think I didn't love My Year of Rest and Relaxation. I didn't love this, and I don't know if it's just because they're not, like, intersectional, and so maybe that's why, like, I feel like I can't fully relate to them, and most of the time, they follow wealthy white women, where I cannot relate to a wealthy white woman in lots of ways where, like, they're just able to quit their jobs and not do jack, like.
live in estates on the
Yeah.
countryside, like, must be nice. Like, my depression might be cured too, TBH.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might be fine if I could just go off into the country for like 3 months at a time.
Yeah. Summer vacay. Like, what? Hello? And so I feel like and that's, like, I think a criticism that I have of, like, My Year of Rest and Relaxation and, like, The Bell Jar. Where I feel like the bell jar does it better because it actually follows, like, a woman that goes to, like, an asylum. So, like, you can see, like, the treatment and stuff that way versus the with My Year in Rest and Relaxation and The Yellow Wallpaper, it's literally just, like, wealthy white women not having to work and getting to lay around all day.
And the thing is, like, she didn't they had, like, the financial stability to be able to stay home and do
Yes.
treatments at home.
Yeah.
And, like, that is objective like, we know the history of, like, how women, with that were diagnosed with quote, unquote, "hysteria" were treated in mental health facilities.
Harmful, I
Which,
mean, like
God forbid, I call it wasn't even mental health. Who was taking care of the mental health? It was all just, like, a bunch of bogus treatments that they were trying to, like, rid people of rather than, like, really taking in a holistic approach and looking at environmental factors, like diet, other health issues that might be contributing to it. They just were like, women are crazy, lock them away."
yeah, and that's one thing too where, like, a lot of people and, like, you were, like, criticizing the husband and stuff and through this where it's like I feel like, one, the husband doesn't get enough, like, page time to really, like, see how he is as, like, a character or as a person and whether or not she was critiquing her husband or not, because I feel like, at least, like, with my partner and stuff, like, he was making a lot of jokes, like, about putting firecrackers in her pillowcase or whatever, and it's like, you were criticizing that, but I feel like maybe it was somebody trying to make lighthearted of a situation of something that they don't understand, and obviously, this man cared about her enough to not just throw her in an asylum and, like, get a new wife, you know? Because that was something that this man could have easily have done because she already gave birth to his kids in that way, like
It is true, we are only getting it from her perspective, her viewpoint. She is going to, like, characterize the main characters in this as, like, villains as she, like, progresses in her like, postpartum psychosis,
yeah, and it's like
which I can definitely see that, but, like, some of the stuff he's just like, "Well, don't just be a silly goofy, just get over it," and I was just like, "Brother,
but it's also, like, because
what are you
you
saying?"
compare it to the time where it's like, they don't even know any of this stuff, like, yes, he's a doctor, but he's obviously not like we have psychologists now, they didn't have, like, psychologists like that back in the day, like, a doctor was, like, a doctor, they did everything, like and that's why, like, nowadays, like, medicine is so important to be specialized where we have, like, pediatricians that only specialize for children specifically, or we have like pharmacists that specialize in specifically on how the medicine is made and what like what dosage and stuff for people to get. Where back then we didn't have these sort of like scientific thoughts around it where people are just like, sorry, like I don't know what to do. Like, especially I can know like when somebody doesn't understand mental health, they can't even comprehend like the ideas of the thoughts where you just have no will and things like that. Where I feel like this man, where maybe he probably wasn't the best husband, no, but it's also like you could tell by the end of the book whenever she goes to kill herself, she has the door locked. He's trying to get in there. He's trying to break down the door. He's screaming for an axe. He doesn't want his wife to die. So obviously he cares about her and loves her enough in that situation versus another man who maybe actually did not like was just like, "Oh, well, get over it." They would just be like, "Oh, well, they're dead. All well." You know?
Yeah, I think perhaps, just given what we are learning from the book itself, not, like, her actual life,
Yeah. We didn't do any
it does
research
kind of
on her
paint him in a
husband.
situation where, like, maybe he knew how bad, like, these, mental health, like, facilities were, so he's like, "No, I'm not gonna subject you to that, so I'm
Yeah.
gonna take you to a home and be able to, like, take care of you from home as much as I can because he was still working,
Yes.
but it's kind of up for interpretation on how you take it. I did notice a lot of people in, like, the, like, praise and criticisms or whatever of the Goodreads comments were, like, doing the same thing, like, critiquing the husband and, like, his thing, and I think it's probably stemming from a place where a lot of people resonate with Gilman's, like, narrative character and maybe weren't receiving adequate care during, like, their, like, postpartum,
Mhm.
like, crises that they were experiencing, so maybe they could, like, resonate more directly with her, um, which I
Just
can
marry a
kind
better
of see
man.
to a certain. Listen, like, I had, like, really gnarly postpartum depression, anxiety, OCD, and,
Yeah.
like, I probably could have gotten institutionalized at one point, like, it got really bad. That being said, I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with, like, everything, like, if I had didn't have to live in like as a working class person, and I had a home and I had somebody to take care of the baby when they're crying, like dealing with colic and whatnot, I would have been significantly better off. Like she had a lot of tools at her disposal to take care of herself,
Yes.
which I certainly didn't receive. And I know a lot of other working class peoples don't receive.
And they didn't receive during that time. So it just feels like
Exactly.
it feels hard. That's why I'm saying it feels so hard to have sympathy for this rich, wealthy woman where it's like people are going through so much worth. And yes, I can understand. Like, I do want to critique like the mental health facilities and stuff. Like, she should have had those, like, she should have, like, that community and stuff that she had to help take care of her kids, help take care of her, and things like that. But I don't think it should just be restricted to wealthy white women. I feel like it should be for every single woman that experiences those types of things, you know?
I would love to see this written, and I can't remember what I think it's called literary cannibalism, where people will rewrite like American stories like classics, but they'll do it from the perspective of like an oppressed person or a colonized demographic. So
Oh,
people will rewrite like other things. I would love to see this done from like a working class like black woman during the same time in the same area, or like in a different area, like experiencing the same things, and how it would, I think it would be, like, much more nuanced. It would probably we'd probably rate it 5 stars,
yes.
TBH. If anyone has that,
Yeah,
would love to read that,
agree.
but I think it would be better because
It falls
it's not
very
enough, like,
flat.
you're left wanting so much more, and the ending is kind of just,
The
"Meh, it's fine."
Like, I mean, like, I love when people die in books. Like, that is something, like, anytime somebody dies in a book, instantly, I usually add an extra star. I'm not gonna lie. Like, usually I'll be like, damn, they died. That's pretty serious, you know? Death is a very final thing in most books. And I usually support that. But in this way, it just feels like so. Honestly, like, I've never experienced postpartum depression and things like that. Like, I just have regular depression. Sorry. I got the boring kind. Um, like regular, like plain old depression, anxiety, like that sort of thing. But to me, and like, I feel like with a lot of other people that struggle, I mean, my own father committed suicide, if you didn't know. So, I have a lot of experience around that, and just the way that, like, I don't know if, and it seems like the way that it was portrayed as, like, the character committing suicide does not feel accurate to how a person would commit suicide, especially how even, like, the author, whenever she did end up deciding to end her life, the way she did it was so much different than how, like, how much traumatic she made it for her husband, you know? Like, and that's something that, like, I feel like at least I know, like, there's, like, been studies about it, like, whenever women tried to commit, it's, one, usually not as successful because they don't use as successful methods because they usually do things that are, deemed as, like, less messy because a lot of the time women are more aware of, like, someone's gonna have to clean this up, someone's gonna have to take care of this, versus men usually are more successful because they do use more lethal things like a weapon. But then, of course, those things end up being more messy and they don't have, like, the same impulses that I feel like a woman would have to, you know what I'm saying? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think I could see what you mean. Like, the way she's talking about it in The Yellow Wallpaper, and having such, like, a deep, I think it's depersonalization, like, where she's so separated from herself and she's
Mhm.
hallucinating. And she's having a lot of different types of hallucinations, like visual, and I can't think of what it's called. Like, she's smelling. Like, she has these hallucinations of like rotting things. Like, that can drive someone to madness, but to make it seem like she's trying to
Help.
kill like the
She's
person
trying to help
who's
the
in the
person in the
wallpaper, but
wallpaper.
she's also trying to help them.
Yeah.
It's quite confusing, and maybe that's why people like it. And I like a good, like, ambiguous ending that leaves readers the opportunity to have discussions like this. But
Mhm.
I just don't think it's
If it's well
effective in this
written,
format because it's so short.
yeah. Where you couldn't even feel, like, any type of sympathy, or and maybe that's something too where, like, if this was maybe, like, a normal length novel or even, like, a 150-page, like, novella or something like that, like, reading something like that maybe could have been more impactful if you actually got to feel like this woman going into madness, where I feel like it was just like she was kind of like normal, like general like depression, postpartum depression at the beginning. And then it's just like I feel like since it's so short, you just cycle through all of these things that probably happened over the whole 3 months she was there versus you're there for 1 week and then like the next week it's like she's killing herself. Instead of like experiencing all that time where you could slowly experience and you possibly feeling that feeling of madness where you like sympathize with her in that way, where I feel like this just it keeps you so separated out of it where you just feel like a viewer, so you can't feel the empathy in that way. You can't feel like you're being in someone's shoes in that way. And I feel like that's a lot of the time how people are empathetic is by relating to those experiences that other people have, where you can't fully relate to her experiences in that way because it's so like separated from the character and what she's doing and seeing and things like that.
And it's for these reasons that I just can't, in good faith, call this like a literary masterpiece.
Mm-mm.
Or it's
I think
not, I don't think it's all that revolutionary,
I think
in my opinion.
I agree. Like, I think historically, I'm sure, like back in the 1890s or whatever, whenever it was first published, then I'm sure it was probably a great piece of literature. And back then, if I lived back then, it probably would have meant something to me then. But now, looking at it through the eyes of 2024, where we understand mental health so much more, we understand like gender and like sex in that way, and like taking care of your children and like women's way of working and things like that so much more, that now we could have a much better like and more constructive conversation written out rather than how this yellow wallpaper is written.
I do think that something that is lacking in a lot of people's reviews and whatnot is taking into consideration, like, a lot of people when they're talking about this book don't acknowledge the fact that in at this point in time in history, who was able to read of women, who had the capability, who had the literacy rates, because it wasn't working class people, it wasn't working class poor white women, it wasn't like women of color, of or even like men of color. Like, literacy rates were
We're
not huge. You were a worker, that was like your sole purpose in society, where a lot of like white women, the suffragettes, they had the ability to read, and it's not like they were going out of their way to like
there's like
really build on that for the collective. It was just for like white communities that they really focused on like raising literacy rates.
There was like a quote in Women Race and Class 2 with it by Angela Davis where she talks about like a lot of the wealthy white women, the reason why like they joined like the suffragette movement and like the socialist movement and stuff like that was just to like have something to do, because they were just like women that stayed home all the time and they didn't actually have like things to do outside of the home. So that's a lot of the reason why women ended up joining these types of movements, is to have, I'm sure, to build some sense of community and stuff like that, versus like our liberation now, like with me and you and like other women of color nowadays and other people of color and any like minority and stuff like that now, is that the reason why we're so for liberation and reading about liberation and forming community and things like that is because it's absolutely necessary for our survival, not just for some little fun little tea party thing that we're trying to do. Versus like I feel like Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Susan B. Anthony, and Charlotte Perkins Gilman probably were doing, just to have something outside of themselves to focus on.
Yeah. And like, it's not going to say like, I know a lot of them had like, they did like hunger strikes and whatnot, but it did seem like a lot was more like performative
Mhm.
rather than like revolutionary. And it makes sense. They're bored
Yes.
housewives and they're like, oh wow, something's wrong, but I'd rather have the money and the comfort to
To
stay home
yeah.
and like be able to go out on my own accord. When they're the people who were spearheading these movements were not like the rich white women. They just like came and like helped fund it because they like, oh, this is good,
Yeah.
this will help me. But
It'll give them the benefit in the long run without actually having to do the work of liberation. Which is like I can understand that, where like if you have a large family to take care of or you're actually working and things like that, where especially nowadays it's very hard to build that community and things like that because everyone is so tired because we have to work so much more than we had to work in the past and things like that. I mean, of course, I understand like people of color and women were working a lot more then too, but then they the difference is they had the benefit of the white people that didn't work to help fund those things versus now we're becoming so separated, like the classes of the poor, the working class and the rich are becoming so separated that we don't even have we have to like rely on the good faith of a rich person to basically decide to help, which they won't.
Trying to think of anything else, but I think I'm kind of hit all the nails on the head.
Yeah. I mean, we've been talking for
Do you have
almost 50
any
minutes.
closing thoughts on the yellow wallpaper? I guess we could talk about our overall rating of it
I
to wrap it up real quick.
I gave it a 2.75, rounded up to 3 on Goodreads, but it was not my favorite. I mean, it was nice that it was short, but also like anybody who knows me knows I don't really read short things. I feel like I can't
It's true.
relate to it as much. So
I gave it, I think originally I had gave it like a 2 star for being
yeah,
like a horror book, but then rereading it as like through like a feminist lens, like I it's readable, it's interesting to a degree to see like how women were writing like their stories, like their
lived
like
experiences.
viewpoints. Yeah, lived experiences in a fictional lens, and I can see it in some ways being influential. However, I think we've just moved past this and it shouldn't be held on such a high pedestal. Um
I think this like
People are still holding it to today, which is frustrating. So hopefully this is able to refute a lot of those mischaracterizations of this novel.
us reading this makes me want to reread the Bell Jar. I think I originally gave the Bell Jar 4 stars, but again, the Bell Jar it falls into the same trap of just being like a racist white woman, like complaining about her ailments and stuff like that. Where it's like I feel like they must understand that women of color and people of color and black women end up suffering more than they do, but they feel like they need like this need to like make it look like as if they're suffering the worst or something. But I feel like
Yeah, like the suffering Olympics that like Ben Shapiro creates, like the
yeah.
pyramid of like the most oppressed person.
Yeah, it's like
Like they embody that.
because they have like the white fragility of not being able to actually like empathize with other people or it's like yes, you can have shitty experiences and stuff like that, but other people do have it worse, and it's like you have to be able to accept that and come together within your community to build up and strengthen your bonds with each other. Cuz like the thing is that like whenever I see like someone suffering whether it's more or less than I do, I feel like that's a great way to use that to empathize with them and to relate your lived experiences that way versus trying to make it look like, well, my life is worse because of this, this, and this. Where it's like, oh, like both of these situations suck. We should be trying to do something together to rid these of the reasons that everything sucks, you know?
So maybe bell jar review coming
If
in the
people want
future.
it, I would do a reread on it. I mean, I read it in a couple years ago now. But I mean, especially since you haven't read it, I feel like it is like it falls under that section and we are doing a night bitch review at some point cuz that was one of my 5-star reads this year. Which I haven't gotten to talk much about and I've been itching to talk about it so badly because Mariah didn't like it, spoiler alert. So, I think we'll have a lot more productive conversation in that way because with this, I feel like it's hard whenever we have like the same opinion to have like a discussion about it because we're just like, yes, so true, yes, so true. Versus, I feel like the night bitch will be very interesting because it'll be like a lot more of a like debating argument. Usually we don't. I feel like usually we're on the same page about everything too.
I know we're gonna need a mediator.
Yeah,
Is
we're
there a Craig bot or mediator
we're gonna need someone to be
to
like,
debate?
like that's like, well, it'll be like the debate where it's like they turn off your microphone after 2 minutes or whatever.
That would be so funny.
Um, but other than that, I don't know if there's anything else really to discuss or
No,
talk about. I mean, it's a really short book, so it's like I'm surprised we're able to discuss this much. There's been longer books that we weren't even able to talk about this long.
There, that is the one thing. Is like there is a lot more substance to review in this than say a Colleen Hoover book, in
But
my
do you
opinion.
think
Because we read Ugly Love and we stared at the camera for like 30 minutes and we're just like, well, it was a book I read.
that's because it's like a classic and so like because of like the time frame that it was written in, it's more highly regarded and since it's more of like an original thought since this was probably like one of the first like women's fiction
I
being
think so. I think we're gonna have to review more like classics like this and understand like the history surrounding it and see how it influences other pieces of literature
I feel like
today.
yeah,
That would be good.
I don't know. It's very hard for me. I've never been a big classics reader. I listened to the audiobook for The Great Gatsby a few years ago too. Can you believe that? I listened to a whole audiobook. Um,
Kristen doesn't do
no,
audiobooks.
never. Um, and like some of the like I haven't read that many like classics, but I feel like The Great Gatsby like that's something that like everyone feels like so highly regarded, but I feel like we would have nothing to talk about, you know? But I don't know if it's just cuz it follows like rich
With
white
there's a
men.
will, there's a way.
I don't know. Because like there's like sometimes we'll be like, "Oh, we should read this for the podcast." And we'll read it. We'll be like, "Well, I don't know what we're going to talk about this, so maybe we can't do this one, you know?"
We'll see.
But if you have any classics recommendations, I know we want to do Frankenstein at some point by Mary Shelley, another feminist writer.
We might
Um,
have to do some Edward Bellamy because he
I don't even know who
was
that is.
around the same time that Charlotte Perkins Gilman was alive, I think. And they like influenced each other's work. He's like a utopian socialist of like the
Oh.
late 1800s, 1900s. He's on our Notion TBR. I'll show you.
Oh, okay. Well, if you guys have any recommendations too, we'll take those. If there's anything specifically you want us to talk about next. Um, do we already plan what our next episode is gonna be?
I think it's
I'll check the
The
calendar.
Good Girl's Guide to Murder.
Is it really?
I think so.
Yeah, I think you are correct. That one will just be the first one, I think, because Mariah's only gonna read the first one. I'm gonna try to read all three of
Oh,
them
also,
before.
while this is going up, very important,
Oh,
we are going to be together.
yes. Whenever this is
Kristen and I
live,
are leaving
we
the
will be
comfort of
together.
our homes.
We will be in Oregon together, going to Portland, which is very exciting. This will be only the second time we've met in person, which is crazy to think.
So we're anticipating lots of like
Vloggy
awkward
content, yeah.
stares. We're like,
I don't know. The last time we were in
um,
person together, we were fine.
yeah, we had a yapathon.
Well, I had a yapathon, which is nothing new for me. I could talk to the wall together again, but whenever this is uploaded, so it's less than a week from today for us.
Yep, it'll be up on the Thursday, so you'll be seeing stuff on the Instagram, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be doing lots of things, lots of Oregon
We are
things.
going to Powell's City of Books in Portland, which is the biggest bookstore on the late in the Pacific Northwest.
And I've
So
never
we are
been to the
probably gonna
Pacific
vlog through. I haven't either. Oh,
Northwest.
I thought you were gonna say
Okay.
Powell's.
Uh,
I'm a liar. I'm a faker.
I would hope you've been to the Pacific Northwest, considering that's where you live. But this will be the further. I mean, this is like as west as you can go in the United States. I've never been west. The furthest west I've been is Missouri, maybe, which shows how far west I've been. I don't know. I guess maybe Illinois is a little bit more west, but I only went to Chicago, which I don't think is very west. But yeah,
That's like Midwest.
yeah, that's like the
In
furthest
the
west I've
middle.
been is Missouri. And I went to St. Louis, so that's still on the eastern side too. So it'll be exciting to go and experience new stuff. It'll be weird because like this will probably be one of the biggest cities I've ever been to as well. Like I don't know. I think population wise, it's comparative to Louisville though.
Yeah, but it's like more condensed
Yeah,
and
and there's
taller.
actually like it's actually like people live in the city versus here like the metro area is very like the metro is like small but like the whole city limits is wide here. Does that make sense? I don't know how to
Yeah.
describe that.
it makes sense because when I went there, I was like, oh, this is like really spread out.
Yeah, like we didn't even go
But
to the
like Portland
downtown
is
with
like,
you. Like
I don't know how
that's
to
isn't that
explain
so
it.
crazy? Like we didn't even go downtown with you. Like we didn't take you to like
I
our
think you're gonna
skyscraper
like
buildings.
a public transit, which I think is cool. People
Yeah, if I
complain
don't
about
throw
it,
up.
but I think Dramamine.
I get
All
motion
right,
sick. But anyways, we've kind of been rambling on at the end of this, but
this is a good time because I'm due to take my fluoxetine. So
wow. Okay, well, hopefully I don't know what I was gonna say. Don't forget to download what? Don't forget to donate to Muhammad's family. The link is below. Other than that, I don't think there's really anything else for us to say. Thank you for listening. Check us out on social media. Comment any suggestions you have below. Thank you and good night.